Hi, this is Jamie Goldstein of North Texas Center for Mindfulness, and I want to share about the neuroscience of mindfulness. I will keep it brief because it would take me hours to cover all the ways that mindfulness changes the brain, which is validated through research. So I will share just a few reasons right now. Mindfulness integrates the entire brain, which means that the different regions of our brain can communicate with one another more effectively and efficiently, which allows for overall better brain health and optimal cognitive functioning. Well, how does this happen? Mindfulness is essentially attention training. It is your ability to skillfully direct your attention to the present moment. The more you practice mindfulness, the more you increase your capacity to pay attention and be mindful. And the way you focus your attention changes the neural circuitry within the brain. The best predictors of your well-being is how interconnected and integrated your neural circuitry is wired. This comes from the Human Connectome Project, which is working on mapping the neural circuitry of the entire brain. So here are a few ways that mindfulness affects specific brain regions within our brain. Mindfulness not only increases activation, but it also increases gray matter, which is the cortical thickness of the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the front region of your cerebral cortex right behind your forehead. And this is the executive functioning center of the brain. It works with higher order thinking processes. So it has to do with initiation, planning, organization. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for our higher order thinking, decision making, working memory, our ability to regulate our social interactions. So it has to do with affect regulation and emotional regulation. It's very much how we express our personalities. So you may notice when you're feeling really stressed out or overwhelmed or angry or anxious or frazzled, your ability to think clearly and make good decisions is significantly diminished. That is because when we go into that state of fight or flight, our amygdala takes over and hijacks the brain, and our prefrontal cortex goes offline, so to speak. And the amazing thing that research with mindfulness shows us is that mindfulness disrupts that pattern, disrupts that neural pathway. So it's not as easy for the amygdala to shut down the prefrontal cortex. So we can maintain better affect regulation, emotional regulation, make better decisions in social situations, and think more clearly. So we'll come back to the amygdala in a moment. Mindfulness also increases activation and cortical thickness within the hippocampus. That has to do with learning and memory. So you may notice, again, when you're really stressed out, it's harder to remember and learn things. That is this connection to the hippocampus. So when we practice mindfulness, our ability to remember things and to learn increases. Mindfulness also increases matter in the anterior cingulate cortex and the insula. Both of these are implicated for social regulation, affect regulation, social awareness, and there is an implication in empathy and mirror neurons. So mindfulness practicing alone changes these brain regions within our brain. Now coming back to the amygdala. Mindfulness decreases the amygdala size, which is a really great thing because the amygdala is within the limbic region of the brain. It's a little deeper within the brain, and it is that fear center of our brain. The amygdala, the alarm signals in the amygdala go off when we believe that there's a threat, and then a cascade of neuromechanisms occurs that brings us to a state of fight or flight. But that amygdala is that alarm signal for the brain. And that's typically when the amygdala goes off, that's when the prefrontal cortex goes offline. So mindfulness, through practicing mindfulness, we decrease our amygdala size and activation within the amygdala. So we're not as likely to go into a state of fight or flight when it's not necessary, right? When there's false alarms. Mindfulness also causes a right to left shift in prefrontal cortex activity. And there's research that shows when there's more right prefrontal cortex activity, that's associated with more symptoms of depression, anxiety, hypervigilance, and the left side, more left prefrontal cortex activity, is associated with greater levels of emotional well-being. And mindfulness also is shown to decrease activation of the default mode network. That we could go into a whole thing on that, but essentially when the default mode network is going on in the background, we're not paying attention. So here's just a few ways that mindfulness literally changes the structure and the neural circuitry and the activation of our brains.